The first time the desert said my name, I was alone, half a mile from the nearest road, with the sun falling red behind a line of black dunes and my brother's blood drying on my sleeve.
At first I thought it was the wind.
There was enough of it, thin and restless, moving over the open waste in long, whispering strokes. It brushed the ridges of sand, hissed through the dry spines of thorn brush, and tugged at the canvas flap of my pack with the soft persistence of fingers that wanted in. The whole evening had that hollow quality deserts get at dusk, when the heat begins to bleed out of the earth and every sound travels too far. A man hears strange things in that hour. He hears his own pulse in his ears. He hears insects that are not there. He hears the memory of voices. That is what I told myself when I froze and heard very clearly from somewhere ahead of me, Yusef, not shouted, not spoken like a person calling from a distance, breathed, right at the level of my ear. I spun so hard my heel slid down the face of the dune. My flashlight jerked across the open sand, beam trembling over rippled slopes, low stone outcrops, the white ribcage of some animal long picked clean by sun and foxes. Nothing moved. No one stood there. There were no tracks except mine and Sami was 2 hours behind me, back at the truck, cursing me for storming off like a fool after our fight. At least, that was where he should have been. I stood there listening, chest tight, every muscle gone cold despite the heat still trapped in my shirt. The desert spread around me in all directions, immense and silent, dunes like frozen waves under a bruised sky. To the west, the last light clung to the horizon. To the east, night was already gathering in the troughs between hills of sand, filling them with ink. Then my radio crackled. Static burst from the clipped speaker on my shoulder, loud enough to make me flinch. "Yusef," Sami's voice, ragged with interference. "Answer me." I grabbed the radio. "I'm here." More static. Then, "Don't move." Something in his tone turned my mouth dry. Sami was older than me by 9 years and had spent most of his life speaking like nothing in the world could surprise him. He had crossed border deserts and sandstorms, slept under broken trucks, dug for Roman glass in valleys where men disappeared for less. He laughed at bad omens, spat at ghost stories, and once broke a smuggler's nose with a canteen because the man tried to short him on fuel. I had never heard him sound afraid. "What happened?" I asked. The speaker hissed. For a second I thought the signal had dropped. Then I heard him breathing, fast, too fast. "You came back?" he asked. The words made no sense.
What?
A pause. Then, lower, "I saw you." The wind moved over the dune behind me with a long, dry sigh. "Sami, I'm not back at the truck. I know that now." His voice wavered, and that frightened me more than the words themselves. "Listen to me carefully. I saw you standing outside the headlights." I said nothing. The desert suddenly felt bigger. "We argued," he continued, "and you walked east. I stayed by the truck maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. I was checking the rear tire, and then..." He swallowed audibly. I looked up and saw someone standing beyond the light. The sky had darkened enough now that the first stars were showing. My flashlight beam looked small and useless. "It was you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I thought it was. Same clothes, same eyes. Face in shadow. Just standing there. The radio clicked with bursts of static as if the air itself were trying to chew through his voice. "I called your name." It didn't answer. Then it started walking away from the truck. A knot formed under my ribs. "And you followed it," I said.
No.
A beat. I almost did. The wind changed. It came from the north now, cooler, carrying the mineral smell of deep earth and old stone. Not the smell of open sand. This was something else, something stale and sealed away.
What did it do?
I whispered. For a moment the only sound was static and the thin hiss of sand shifting under my boots. Then Sami said, it turned toward me. His breathing sharpened again, and in that instant I could see the scene perfectly without having been there. The truck parked crooked in the gathering dark, one headlight brighter than the other. My brother standing in the spill of yellow light, one hand on the tire iron, squinting into the dark figure just beyond the edge of visibility, draped in my outline like stolen skin. It was smiling, he said. I felt all the warmth leave my body.
Sami, no.
He cut over me. Don't say anything. Just listen. It looked like you, but the mouth. His voice dropped to a whisper scraped raw by disbelief. too wide. Too many teeth. It smiled at me like it knew me. My throat tightened so hard I had to force the next words out. Where is it now? He didn't answer.
Sami.
The speaker gave a crackle, then a whisper so faint I nearly missed it. It came under the truck. I stared into the darkness.
What?
I heard it moving underneath, he said. Scraping. Slow. Like a person dragging themselves on their elbows. His voice broke on the last word and came back quieter. Then it stopped. The radio hissed between us like a fuse. Stay in the cab, I said instantly. Lock the doors. I'm coming back now. No. The word came sharp as a slap. Don't come back. Stop talking nonsense. I'm not alone. My grip on the radio tightened until the casing dug into my palm. Behind me, somewhere over the next dune, sand shifted. Not wind.
Wait.
A careful depression, as though someone had taken one deliberate step. I turned off the flashlight without thinking. Darkness rushed in all at once, huge and complete, the stars too far away to matter. My own breath sounded loud enough to betray me. Sami, I breathed into the radio. Something's here. So is something here, he whispered back. The two of us fell silent. I crouched slowly, pulse hammering, trying to make myself smaller against the slope of the dune. The sand under my boots was still warm from the day, but the air had gone cold enough that I could feel sweat chilling along my spine. My eyes strained into the dark and began assembling shapes out of nothing: rock, scrub, a bent stake of dead wood, until one of those shapes moved. At the crest of the dune ahead of me, a silhouette stood against the star field. Still, watching. No face. No details. Just the outline of a man with a scarf around his neck, the ends lifting softly in the wind. My scarf. The radio gave a tiny burst of feedback. The figure on the ridge tilted its head. I stopped breathing. Then, from the speaker at my shoulder, Sami made a sound I will hear for the rest of my life if I live to be 100. A strangled, disbelieving gasp, followed by the slam of metal and the violent rattle of a truck door jerking against its lock. It's at the window, he whispered. The figure on the dune took one step down toward me. Under the static, under Sami's breathing, under the restless combing of wind over sand, I heard another sound rising from the dark around me.
Voices.
Not one. Dozens. Soft. Buried. Trembling just below the surface of the dunes, as if the whole desert were full of mouths packed with sand. And all of them were saying my name.
I should have run then.
I know that now. Back to the truck or away from it or anywhere at all. But fear can pin a man harder than rope. I stayed frozen where I was, staring at that descending shape while the whispers multiplied under my feet. Yusuf, Yusuf, Yusuf. The sand around my boots began to sink. At first it was slight, no more than the settling shift of loose ground. Then my right foot plunged to the ankle. I lurched and caught myself on one hand, radio dropping from my grip and tumbling down the dune in a spray of grit. The whispers grew louder immediately, eager, crowding close beneath the surface. The ground was no longer holding me. It was loosening around me with intent. I tore my leg free and scrambled backward on hands and heels, but the dune gave way in a sudden rolling collapse. Sand folded under me like water. My left leg sank to the knee. My hand punched into empty space where solid ground should have been. A cavity. Something had been hollowed out beneath the dune. The silhouette kept coming, gliding down the slope with impossible steadiness while the sand swallowed me by inches. I grabbed for purchase and my fingers struck stone smooth, curved, carved. I dug wildly, coughing as sand poured into my face, and uncovered the edge of something buried just below the surface. Not a rock. A slab. No, an arch. Its top was etched with shapes my panicked mind couldn't make sense of at first. Then the starlight caught them at an angle, and I saw lines of ancient script cut into black stone, packed for centuries under the dune. Between the lines were repeated carvings of open mouths. The ground gave way completely. I dropped through. For one eternal second I was falling inside cold darkness while sand cascaded around me in a roaring sheet. Then I hit a hard floor shoulder first, air blasting from my lungs, and the sound of collapsing sand thundered above as the opening narrowed to a jagged spill of moonless gray. I rolled onto my back, gasping. The air down there was dead and cold, thick with dust and a smell so old it felt poisonous: linen, stone. and the sweet rotting trace of something sealed away too long. High above, the opening in the dune remained half open, just enough to show a sliver of stars. A face appeared there, upside down, peering in. Its eyes were too dark to reflect the stars. Its smile opened wider and wider until the skin at the corners should have torn. Then Sami screamed over the radio somewhere above me. Not one scream, several cut apart by static. Then, abruptly, silence. Complete. Horrible. In the dark below the desert, something moved close to my ear and whispered, in my brother's voice, "You should not have answered when it called." For several seconds after the voice spoke, I could not move. I lay on my back in the dark, every muscle locked, my mouth open but useless, my lungs taking in that dead underground air in shallow, painful sips. Dust settled over my face. Grains of sand clung to my lips and teeth. Above me, the ragged hole in the dune showed only a sliver of star-shot sky, and even that narrow wound of light was shrinking as loose sand continued to hiss inward. The face was gone, my fate, or whatever had worn it. What remained was the silence after Sami's scream. No crackle from the radio, no breathing, no plea for help, nothing. The thing beside my ear did not speak again, but I felt with an animal certainty that it had withdrawn only a few inches into the dark, not vanished. There is a difference between being alone and being unaccompanied. Down there, I understood it perfectly. I was not alone. I had merely lost sight of what was with me. Very slowly, I pushed myself upright. Pain spread through my left shoulder, hot and immediate. I had landed badly. My elbow was skinned raw, my side bruised, and my ankles throbbed from the fall, but nothing felt broken. That should have comforted me. It did not. Injury makes things real. I needed some part of this to still feel like a nightmare, something born of heat and darkness and guilt. But the pain was too exact. The smell was too exact. The cold under the sand was too exact. I reached for the flashlight clipped to my belt. Still there. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped it. When the beam snapped on, the chamber leapt out of the dark in pieces that my mind refused to join together at first. Stone wall, black and smooth. A low vaulted ceiling disappearing into drifting dust. The floor buried ankle deep in fresh sand from the collapse above. And everywhere cut into the walls, carved in repeating relief, packed edge to edge like a field of wounds' mouths. Human mouths.
Not faces.
Not full heads. Mouths only. Some were closed in thin, severe lines. Some were parted as if whispering. Some were stretched wide in a scream so vivid I almost expected sound to pour from them. The craftsmanship was ancient and obsessive. Lips, teeth, tongues, gums, every detail shaped with terrible patience. Thousands of them ringed the chamber from floor to ceiling, all of them angled slightly inward toward the center of the room. Toward me. My stomach clenched. I lifted the light higher and the beam found the rest. The chamber was not large. Maybe 15 feet across, circular, with 3 narrow passageways opening from it like black throats. At the center stood a stone pillar no taller than my chest. Resting on it was a shallow basin of dark metal, green with age. Something had been burned there once, over and over, until the rim had blackened permanently. Around the base of the pillar lay little white fragments half buried in sand. Bone. Not much. Finger joints, perhaps. A piece of jaw no bigger than a coin. I backed away so quickly my heel struck the wall. My flashlight beam shuddered across the carved mouths, and for one nauseating instant I thought they were moving, not all of them. Only the edges, a tremor at the corners of stone lips, as though they were straining to speak. I squeezed my eyes shut, opened them again, and the carvings were still. The radio. I snatched it from where it had landed near my feet, sand grinding in the speaker grill, and thumbed the transmit button.
Sami.
My own voice came back to me from the walls in a thin, scattered murmur.
Sami. Sami.
I tried again, louder.
Sami, answer me.
Only static answered. Harsh, dirty static with strange pulses inside it like distant breathing. Then a voice slid through for half a second, not words, only the shape of a cryan disappeared again. My chest tightened. He was alive. Or he had been a moment ago. I swung the flashlight up to the hole in the ceiling, but it was too high to reach and narrowing steadily. Even if I could jump that far with an injured shoulder, the sand around the opening was unstable. One good push and the whole thing would cave in on me, I would be sealed down there with the mouths and the bones and whatever had whispered beside me in the dark. There had to be another way out. That thought forced me back into motion. Panic narrows the world to one point and traps you there. Movement, any movement, breaks the spell. I turned slowly, light passing over the 3 passageways leading out of the chamber. The first was low and tight, barely wider than my shoulders, descending at a steep angle into darkness. The second was taller, framed by cracked stone uprights incised with the same ancient script I had seen near the opening. The floor beyond it was worn smooth, as if many feet had passed there long ago. The third passage had collapsed partially. Sand spilled through its ceiling in a steady trickle, forming a cone on the floor. Set into the lintel above it was a symbol I recognized instantly, though I had never seen it before in waking life. A circle with an open mouth in its center.
My breath caught. I knew that mark.
Not from books. Not from excavation reports. From my mother. Years ago when Sami and I were boys. She used to tell stories when the electricity failed and the apartment was dark and hot and the city outside had gone strange with silence. She came from the south, from a village that no longer existed except in old maps and the memories of old women. Her stories were not meant for children, but she told them anyway in that half-amused, half-serious voice mothers use when they want to frighten you just enough to keep you obedient. One story had always stayed with me. Not because it was the scariest, because she only told it once. There was, she said, a place under the desert where names were kept. Not written, not recorded, kept. The oldest tribes knew that the deep places listened. They believed that when a person spoke their true grief into the earth, grief with no witness, shame too ugly to say in daylight, love that had rotted into blame, the desert learned the shape of their voice. And once it knew your voice, it could learn your name. Once it learned your name, it could call you. Not immediately. Sometimes years later. But when it did, if you answered, something below would open. I had laughed when she told it. Sami had not. He never laughed at stories from her village. He only listened with that flat, serious stare of his, as though filing each warning away for a future he expected to need it in. Now, with my flashlight shaking over that symbol, I remembered the ending of the story with terrible clarity. Do not answer it, she had said. And if someone you love hears it first, do not go looking for the voice with their name in your mouth. I tasted bile.
Sami had brought us here.
He had called 3 weeks earlier from Basra with that brittle, overbright energy he got whenever a discovery was close. Not an official dig, nothing so safe. A paid job, he said, surveying a route for a telecommunications company before they ran new towers through the western desert. Easy money, good access to untouched ground, and a rumor that an old caravan site lay somewhere off the marked line. He wanted a second pair of hands and someone who could keep his mouth shut. I had said yes before he finished asking. Because I needed the money. Because he was my brother. Because the last time he had needed me, I had not come. That old guilt sat in me like a stone, and I think some part of the desert had already smelled it. The static on the radio thickened suddenly. Then, clear as if you were standing at the mouth of the chamber, Sami said, Yusuf, don't use the tall passage. I nearly dropped the radio again.
Sami.
I pressed it to my mouth. Where are you? A pause. Then I can hear you, but I can't tell where from. The relief that hit me was so sharp it almost buckled my knees. Are you her? Calmly spoken, almost too calmly. I don't know how bad. What happened? Static crack. The speaker chewed at his answer, then released it in fragments.
Something got in after the lights died.
I locked the cab. It smelled like you.
I closed my eyes for a second. Listen to me, I said. I fell into some kind of buried structure. There are tunnels. I'm trying to find another exit. No. His voice sharpened. Stay where you are. I can't. You don't understand. It wants you moving. A soft sound stirred behind me. Not from the radio. From one of the passageways. I turned, beam slicing across the chamber. Nothing stood there, but the darkness in the tall passage looked denser now. Not empty at all, but occupied by some subtle rearrangement of space. The kind of blackness that feels like a held breath.
Sam.
He answered immediately, too immediately, as if he had been waiting. The low one. My light shifted to it. A steep crawl space descending into deeper dark. Something about the speed of his answer made a splinter of unease lodge under my relief.
How do you know?
Silence.
Sami.
The radio hissed. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, younger somehow. Because I'd been here before. My skin pricked.
No, not me.
A static burst mangled his breathing. Or not only me. The chamber walls gave a tiny collective click. It took my mind a second to place the sound. Stone settling, I thought at first. Then it came again, multiplied all around the room in dry little snaps. Teeth. The carved mouths were opening. I do not mean all at once like a machine. It was worse than that. It happened in scattered increments. One pair of stone lips parted beside my shoulder. Then another near the far arch. Then 5 more near the floor, then 20 at the ceiling, each movement small but undeniable, releasing centuries of trapped dust and faint puffs that glittered through my flashlight beam. Teeth showed. Tongues carved from black stone glistened as if wet. The chamber filled with the subtle grinding of worked mouths remembering motion. The radio screamed with feedback. I clamped a hand over my free ear and back toward the pillar in the center. Every mouth in the chamber hung slightly open now, not wide, waiting. Then they inhaled. The sound was impossible. 1,000 tiny intakes at once, a long dry drawing in of air from all around me. The fresh sand on the floor shivered toward the walls. Dust lifted. My clothes tugged against my skin as if caught in a current. And then the whispering began. Not from below the floor this time. From the mouths themselves.
Not all speaking the same thing.
Different words, different tones, men and women and children, old and young, some pleading, some laughing, some sobbing through broken teeth. The voices overlapped until language dissolved into a hideous human rustle. Buried within it, clear as a thread drawn through cloth, one voice kept surfacing again and again. My mother's. Don't follow the one that loves you face. I stumbled backward so hard I struck the central pillar. The basin atop it rocked. Something brittle shifted inside it with a soft clatter. The whispering surged. The tall passage darkened further. A figure stepped into the threshold. It was Sami. For one mad instant, relief flooded me so strongly I almost called out. He was bloodied, limping, one side of his shirt torn open, face pale under a film of sand. He looked exactly as I would expect after an accident in the dark. He looked terribly, wonderfully human. Then he smiled. Too wide. The same smile the thing outside the truck had shown him. My body reacted before thought did. I snatched the metal basin from the pillar and hurled it at him. It struck the figure's chest with a deep bell-like note. Not a clank, something resonant and wrong, as though I had hit a hollow chamber instead of flesh. The figure folded inward unnaturally at the point of impact, then straightened with the basin half embedded in its chest. No blood, no pain, only that widening grin. Its eyes were not dark now. They were full of packed sand. It took one step into the chamber. The mouths in the walls began whispering my name. I ran for the low passage. The crawl space dropped sharply enough that I had to half slide, half brace myself against the walls. Stone tore at my palms. Sand poured after me in little streams. Behind me, I heard the thing enter the chamber with an easy, unhurried gait, as if it knew exactly how little my effort mattered. The tunnel bent left after 10 feet, then narrowed. I had to go onto hands and knees. My flashlight beam jumped across close walls covered in more carvings, not mouths this time, but human figures kneeling with their heads thrown back while long ribbons flowed from their lips into the hands of faceless shapes standing over them. Voices, I thought dimly. They were giving away their voices. My shoulder screamed each time I crawled. The air grew colder, damper somehow, though there could be no water down there. I could still hear whispering behind me, not echoing anymore but following. And beneath it a slow, dragging scrape like something pulling itself forward with patient confidence. The tunnel opened suddenly and I nearly pitched face first over a ledge. I stopped at the last instant, pebbles scattering from under my chest, and shone the light downward. A vast chamber opened below, bigger than any burial room I had ever seen, bigger than many mosques. The beam vanished into distance before it found the far wall. Stone columns rose like tree trunks from the dark, each one carved in spirals of mouths and eyes. The floor lay perhaps 30 feet below, but much of it was hidden beneath drifts of sand that had poured down over centuries through fissures in the ceiling. In the center of that immense underground hall stood something like a dry well or circular pit ringed with black stone. Around it knelt dozens of shapes, human shapes, motionless, head bowed. My breath clouded faintly in the light. It was that cold. For a heartbeat, I thought they were statues. Then one of them lifted its head and I saw a face glint pale across the distance. Not a statue, a person. Another lifted its head, then another. Then all around the ring, as if responding to some unheard summons, the kneeling figures began to rise. The radio crackled at my belt. Sami's voice came through in a frantic whisper. "Yusuf, whatever you do, don't let them hear your real voice." Behind me, very close now, came the sound of something smiling in the dark. I did not understand what Sami meant until the first of the figures below opened its mouth and answered him in my voice. The sound came up through the vast chamber like something lifted from the bottom of a well. "Yusuf, perfect. Not similar. Not close. Perfect." The same rhythm. The same breath between words. The same roughness in the throat I had carried since childhood after a winter fever that nearly killed me. Hearing it rise from that thing below was like watching my own reflection peel itself off a mirror and begin walking around the room without me. More heads were lifting now. My flashlight shook over them in brief, violent flashes. Faces caked in powder-fine dust, lips cracked black, eyelids drawn tight or hanging open over eyes filmed white with dryness. Their clothing was wrong in a way that made time blur. Some wore robes so old they had faded to the color of bone. Others wore trousers, jackets, scarves, uniforms, garments from different decades, different lives, all stiff with age and sand. One figure still had a rusted canteen hanging at its side. Another wore the scraps of a cheap blue windbreaker. One small shape, God help me, no taller than a child, had bracelets on both wrists that glimmered softly when my light hit them. All of them turned their faces up toward me. And from that ring around the pit, in 100 stolen voices, they began calling to one another. Not names at first, voices, fragments. The sound of a woman laughing breathlessly, a man reciting a prayer, a child asking for water, a radio announcer giving the weather, a lover whispering, "Come closer," an old man clearing his throat, someone crying in helpless, exhausted little hiccups. The voices were not attached to the right mouths. A young girl's body spoke in the cracked baritone of an old man. A broad-shouldered figure in desert robes let out the frightened mewling of a child. A bent old woman-shaped thing whispered with a teenage boy's nervous bravado. The whole chamber became a grotesque choir of borrowed human leftovers. Every sound too intimate, too ordinary, too alive to belong in that cold underground dark. Then, beneath all of them, another sound began rising from the pit at the center. A slow turning. Stone grinding against stone. Behind me, the scraping in the tunnel stopped. The thing wearing my brother's face had reached the bend. I could feel it there without looking, patient and delighted, watching me discover I had nowhere to go. "Yusuf," Sami whispered over the radio, low and urgent. "Listen to me very carefully." My throat worked, but I did not answer. "Good," he said instantly. "Do not speak. Not even to me if you can help it. Just listen." The figures below were standing fully now. Their heads kept tipping upward in tiny, curious jerks as though they were catching the scent of my breath. My flashlight found the circular pit again. Its ring was carved from the same black stone as the chamber above, but more intricately, banded with inscriptions and open mouths cut in spirals around the rim. At first I thought the turning sound came from within it. Then I realized the pit itself was rotating very slowly, like the lid of some ancient mechanism beginning to wake.
What is this place?
I whispered before I could stop myself. The answer did not come from the radio. It came from the figures below. Dozens of mouths opened at once, and in perfect unison they said, in my mother's voice, "The place where names go when grief makes an offering of them." The words hit me so hard I nearly slipped from the ledge. My light jittered across the ring of figures. One of them stepped forward from the others, moving stiffly, joints resisting after long stillness. It had once been a woman, I think. Her hair hung in clotted ropes around a face sunken so badly the teeth showed through the skin at the cheeks. But her eyes were clear. Not alive, never that, but clear enough to look directly at me. When she spoke, it was not with my mother's voice anymore. It was with hers. A dry, shredded whisper that still somehow carried across the chamber. You shouldn't stand there. That's where they watch from. Something touched the back of my ankle. I jerked so hard I almost fell. The tunnel behind me was empty or appeared empty, but a little trail of sand ran inward along the floor as if something had just drawn back its hand. The woman below looked past me into the darkness of the passage and flinched. Too late. The ring of figures lowered their heads all at once. Every light in the chamber changed. There were no lamps, no flames, no visible source, yet a dim amber glow began to seep from the carvings around the pit, bleeding up through the inscriptions like embers waking under ash. It spread outward in faint lines across the floor, not random cracks but channels, patterns, a design buried under centuries of dust. The vast chamber was one enormous ritual floor, and I was standing on one of its outer marks. The voice on the radio was no longer whispering.
Run, Sami.
The thing behind me answered in his voice from 6 feet away. Run where? I turned. It filled the tunnel, bent almost double to fit the cramped space. It still wore the shape of my brother so well that the eye wanted desperately to believe. Torn shirt, blood at the shoulder, sand in the beard. But the proportions were wrong now that I saw it this close. The arms were a little too long, the neck craned forward with boneless ease. The jaw hung slack, not in injury but in anticipation. And through the half-open mouth I saw rows of narrow, wet-looking teeth packed far too densely for anything human. Its eyes were my brother's eyes. That was the worst part. Not because they were real, because they were close enough. Yusuf, it said gently, in the exact voice he had used when we were children and I woke from nightmares. Come away from the edge. The radio at my belt crackled with panic. That's not me. The thing smiled without moving its lips.
No, not anymore.
Then it lunged. I threw myself sideways as its hands hit the stone where my chest had been. Fingers dug into rock like hooked metal. The tunnel wall exploded with chips. I slid off the ledge, caught the lip with one hand, and swung out over 30 feet of open dark. My shoulder nearly tore apart. Pain flashed white through my skull. I screamed before I could stop it. The chamber answered. Every figure below snapped its head up. The pit in the center gave a deep, satisfied groan. Hands seized my wrist from above. For one heartbeat, I thought the creature had caught me. Then the grip tightened in a way I knew, hard, calloused, human, angry with effort.
Sami.
He hauled me up with a raw, choking sound and dragged me onto a narrow shelf cut into the stone just below the ledge, a shelf I had not seen in the dark. We tumbled together against the wall, both of us scrambling backward into a recess between two carved columns. He was real. Not because I trusted my eyes anymore, but because the first thing he did was slap his hand over my mouth. I nearly drove my elbow into his throat. He leaned close, his face wild and gray with dust, one side of it furrowed by 3 long bleeding cuts, as though something had raked him through the truck window. His left pant leg was soaked dark from the thigh down. Blood. Real blood. His chest shook with silent, controlled breathing. "Don't," he mouthed. Below us, the ring of figures had begun moving toward the base of the wall beneath the ledge. Not quickly, not with hunger, with purpose. They gathered in a widening crescent directly under the place where I had screamed. Faces tilted up, listening. Some closed their eyes to hear better. One smiled faintly with no lips at all. The creature wearing Sami's shape remained above at the tunnel lip, half visible between hanging streams of sand. It did not pursue us. It only crouched there and watched, head tilted, as if curious to see what we would do next. I peeled Sami's hand from my mouth and pressed my lips to his ear. "How do I know it's you?" His gaze flicked instantly to the thing above us, then back to me. "In Mosul," he whispered, almost soundlessly, "when you were 14. You stole Father's ring and buried it in the stairwell wall because you thought it was cursed." I stared at him. I had never told anyone that, not even him. I felt something ugly and desperate unclench inside me. He saw it in my face and gave one short nod. Then he nearly collapsed. I caught him under the arm. Up close, the damage was worse than I had seen. His left thigh had been opened deeply by something jagged. Blood loss had drained all color from him. His hands shook not with fear now, but with exhaustion. Still, he pulled away from my support the moment he sensed it might make noise. "What happened?" I breathed. He swallowed twice before he could answer. "It got into the truck after you left," he whispered. Not by opening the door. By speaking. I frowned, not understanding. His eyes shone fever bright in the low amber glow from the pit. The glass fogged from the inside, Yusef. That's what I mean. It was outside the window wearing your face, but then I heard your voice behind me. From the back seat. His mouth twitched once, a movement halfway to horror and halfway to bitter laughter. I turned around. He did not need to say more. I saw it. A dark back seat smelling of dust and engine heat. Empty 1 second. Not empty the next. It didn't attack at first, he said. It just kept talking. Asking why I looked so frightened. Asking why I left you alone that day. I felt the floor of the story opening beneath us before he even finished.
What day?
His eyes met mine. The day our mother died. I looked away first. Below us, the figures had begun to circle the wall, palms pressed to the stone, whispering to it as though reading by touch. The amber lines spreading from the pit brightened little by little, crawling across the floor in nested rings and branching paths. It reminded me of roots growing under glass.
We never talk about her.
There's a reason. He glanced upward. The creature above still watched, and it knows the reason. I pressed my back harder into the recess as if stone could protect me from memory. Our mother had not died in the desert. Not directly. She had drowned in a canal south of Nasiriyah during a family trip when I was 17. That was the official fact, repeated by police and cousins and neighbors who preferred tragedy to scandal because tragedy is cleaner. She slipped, they said. She hit her head. The current took her. But there had been 2 details no one explained. First, she was terrified of deep water. She would not go near riverbanks without gripping someone's arm. Second, before they found her body, she had vanished for nearly 4 hours in open countryside where there was nowhere to vanish to. Sami had been the last one to see her alive. I had found him afterward sitting behind the house with mud on his clothes and her scarf wound around one fist so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He never told me what happened. I never asked in a way that forced him to answer. Grief turned us into cowards in different directions. Now, under the desert, with dead things climbing toward us and a thing in my brother's skin smiling above, I understood why the place had chosen us. Not random men. Not unlucky travelers. Us. It had not called my name because I was nearest. It had called because it already knew our family. Sami saw the realization in my face and nodded once. She heard it too, he whispered. The chamber seemed to tilt.
What?
When she disappeared that day. He spoke quickly now, as though speed might outrun the memory. She told me before she walked off into the reeds that someone was calling her from underground. I thought she was delirious. She had been having those headaches for weeks, hearing things at night, forgetting where she put things, waking up with sand in the house. His breathing shortened. She said it knew her mother's name, her grandmother's. It said our family had promised something a long time ago and never finished paying. Below us, one of the figures reached a column base and began climbing with jerky insect-like determination, fingers finding impossible holds in the carvings.
Why didn't you tell me?
I asked. Because I followed her. His answer came without defense, stripped clean. I followed her into the reeds. She kept talking to someone I couldn't see. Then she started speaking in a voice that wasn't hers. He swallowed. When I grabbed her, she looked right at me and asked why I had answered when it called me years before. Cold spread through my arms.
What do you mean?
He stared at me. And then I remembered. Not fully. Not as a clean flashback. More like a rotten board breaking underfoot and revealing what had been under it all along. I was 9 years old. Summer. Our mother's village had already been half swallowed by abandonment and sand. The adults were inside drinking tea and talking in low voices about debts and land and the shame of leaving graves untended. I had wandered away at dusk, chasing the sound of someone whistling my favorite tune from behind the ruined well at the edge of the date grove. It had called me by name, I had answered. After that, only fragments remained in memory. Dark steps cut underground cool air carved walls. My mother dragging me back to the surface with blood running from her nose, my grandmother striking me so hard my lips split. A night of shouting I was told later I had imagined, and afterward absolute silence about the incident. No one ever mentioned the old well again. Within a year, the family left the village for good. My stomach folded in on itself. I was a child, I whispered. Sami's face softened for the first time since I had found him.
I know.
But she knew. He nodded. She thought she had closed it, he said. She thought she had given it enough. Below us, the first climbing figure reached the shelf opposite and pulled itself up. In the amber light, I saw that its jaw was gone entirely, hacked or rotted away, leaving the tongue exposed in a blackened nest of tendons. Yet when it turned toward us, it spoke clearly in our mother's voice. No one ever gives enough. Sami shoved me sideways a split second before another figure's hand slapped onto the shelf where my face had been. Then another. Then 3 more. Their ascent was no longer slow or reverent. They came with hideous determination, hauling themselves up the columns and grooves, their stolen voices spilling over one another. A laughing child, a sobbing woman, my own voice praying, my father shouting, my mother whispering lullabies. Sami pulled a knife from his belt, not much, just a work blade end slashed at the first reaching hand. The fingers fell, striking the stone like dry sticks. The hand did not bleed. It only kept crawling, severed, feeling forward with frantic little taps. "Move!" he hissed. We ran along the narrow shelf between columns while the thing swarmed upward behind us. The shelf curved around the chamber wall, sometimes widening to 2 feet, sometimes thinning until we had to turn sideways and press our backs to stone. Far below, the pit continued its slow, grinding turn. Amber light spread wider and brighter with each revolution, revealing more of the floor's design. It was not only a ritual circle, it was a map. Concentric paths, branching channels, symbols marking wells, roads, old riverbeds, abandoned settlements. Not a map of this chamber, a map of the desert above us. And at key points across that map, mouths had been carved into the stone and inlaid with dark metal. Each one, I understood with a rush of nausea, was an opening, a listening place. A place where something under the land could hear names spoken in grief.
Sami, I said.
"This isn't one site." "I know, Dad." "How many?" He gave a humorless sound. "How many places do people bury what they can't bear to carry?" Ahead, the shelf ended at a narrow stone bridge spanning open air toward the central pit. At the far end of that bridge stood a pedestal, and on it lay our mother's scarf. Not a copy, not a trick of color. Her scarf. The faded green fabric, the embroidered edge she mended 3 times and never quite straightened. The tiny dark stain near one corner from spilled tea 15 years ago. No one alive could have known that stain except family. My legs nearly failed beneath me.
Sami stopped dead beside me.
For the first time since I found him, real naked terror crossed his face. "It's making us choose," he said. Behind us, the climbing dead closed in, whispering in familiar voices. Above, from the tunnel mouth, the creature wearing his shape began descending the wall with appalling ease, hands and feet finding purchase like a spider's. The scarf lay still on the pedestal, waiting. And from somewhere inside the turning pit came our mother's voice, gentle and exhausted, saying the words she had once used to wake us for school when we were boys. "Come here, my sons. I can finally tell you what I did. There are wounds in a family that do not heal. They learn to sit quietly at the table. They pour tea. They laugh in the right places. They let the years gather over them like dust until everyone agrees not to touch them. Not because they no longer hurt, but because everyone knows that if they are pressed the wrong way, the whole house will come down." Our mother was one of those wounds. And now her voice was rising from the pit at the center of the underground hall, warm and tired and heartbreakingly familiar. While the dead climbed toward us on stolen limbs and the thing wearing my brother's face crawled down the wall behind them with its smile split too wide for bone. Sami grabbed my wrist before I could step onto the bridge. "Don't look at the scarf," he said. But it was already too late. My eyes kept slipping back to it, dragged by the agony of recognition. It lay folded on the pedestal as if someone had just placed it there with care. The fabric moved slightly in the cold air rising from the pit. That little tea stain near the hem, the stitched repair, the frayed corner she used to twist around one finger when she was anxious at was all there. No illusion could have made something so exact. Illusions distort. They exaggerate. They make things mythic. This was intimate. This was memory arranged by something that had been listening to us for years. The dead closed in behind us with hideous patience. They did not rush. They didn't need to. The bridge was narrow, only wide enough for one person at a time, spanning black open air to the slowly turning ring of the pit. Below, deep below, I could hear movement in the dark that no chamber this size should have been able to hide. Vast, slow, submerged movement, as if something alive was turning in sleep beneath the stone.
Sami tightened his grip.
It wants one of us to cross first. What happens if we don't? His eyes flicked to the shelf behind us where the first of the climbing dead had reached the last column. It rose with a dry clicking sound from its knees and turned its ruined face toward us. It did not attack. It only watched with the reverence of a witness waiting for a ceremony to begin. "It comes for both," he said. My mouth went dry. "You know that?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Above and behind the dead, the smiling thing with Sami's face reached the shelf and crouched there, hands dangling between its knees. It watched us as an elder might watch children refuse medicine. Its expression held no anger, only delight sharpened by patience. Sand leaked slowly from the corners of its eyes. Then it spoke in my mother's voice. "You never could decide who should suffer first." The words hit Sami like a fist. I saw it in the way his shoulders jerked, in the flash of raw hatred that crossed his exhausted face. He snatched a loose fragment of stone from the shelf and hurled it. The thing didn't even flinch. The fragment passed through its smile and vanished into the darkness behind it, as if the face were only a curtain stretched over a deeper absence. The dead along the shelf lifted their heads together. Sami whispered, "We have to move." I looked at the bridge, then at him. Together, his expression changed. Even in that place, even then, I recognized it, the old reflex, older brother becoming shield, burden, liar. The look he wore when father died and he told me everything would be fine while the bank took the apartment. The look he wore when our mother's body was carried home and he told the relatives he had gone to look for help the moment she vanished. The look that said he had already decided what I would be allowed to know, what I would be allowed to carry. "No," he said. My anger came back so fast it almost felt like relief. Anger is easier to hold than terror. Cleaner. Hotter.
"No?"
I repeated. His jaw tightened. One crosses. One keeps them back. The dead took another step. Their voices rustled across the shelf in scraps of remembered human life. A prayer. A curse. My name. His name. Our mother humming in the kitchen. The static-laced imitation of my own voice whispering from one lipless mouth. "Let me go first. Let me go first."
I yanked my wrist free.
"You don't get to decide for me anymore. Yusuf, no." My whisper came out so fierce it startled even me. No more half-truths. No more saving me by lying. You knew about this place. You brought me here anyway. You knew our mother heard it. You knew I heard it as a child, and you still brought me. Pain crossed his face, but not surprise. I didn't know it was this place. You knew enough. I knew enough to be afraid, not enough to understand. Then explain it. The dead came one pace closer. Sami looked over his shoulder at them, then back at me, calculating the time left to us. Whatever he saw in my face must have convinced him. Some truths cannot be delayed past a certain point. Fear strips the politeness off grief and leaves only the bone. He leaned close. When Mother disappeared by the canal, he said, I found her kneeling in a dry culvert half a mile from the water. The chamber seemed to tighten around us. She wasn't alone. There was a hole in the earth under the culvert wall, old stone buried under roots and mud. She was talking into it. He swallowed. Not screaming, not crying, talking like she was bargaining. The scarf on the pedestal stirred again. I heard another voice answering her, he said. A man's voice. Many voices. I couldn't tell. She kept saying, take it back. Take my name instead. Leave my son alone. My pulse slammed in my throat.
Which son?
His gaze met mine and held. Of course it had been me. Not because she loved me more. Because I had answered first. The old well. The forgotten village. The childhood fragment buried under years of silence. I saw it all now in brutal pieces. I had not wandered near something bad. I had been heard, named, claimed in some old unfinished debt that ran through our mother's bloodline like rot through wood. She pulled me away when she saw me, Sami said. She was bleeding from the nose and ears. She told me to take you and run if she ever started listening to voices in the house. She made me swear not to tell you. Not because she didn't trust you, because she thought if you knew, you'd listen for it. Something in my chest gave way. All those years I had thought her distance near the end was grief or illness or the slow drowning of a woman trapped between debts and disappointment. The locked bedroom door, the whispered prayers at night, the bowls of salt near the windows, the handfuls of sand we kept finding on the kitchen floor no matter how often she swept. She had not been hiding from madness. She had been standing between something and her child.
What happened at the canal?
I asked. Sami closed his eyes once briefly, like a man stepping into deep cold water. I dragged her away from the culvert, he said. She fought me, harder than I thought she could. She kept saying it wasn't finished, that she needed to speak the rest before sunset. I thought she was delirious. I thought, if I got her home, if I got help. His mouth twitched.
I was 18. I thought all disasters still had ordinary explanations.
Below us, the pit gave a deep internal thud. He kept going. She broke free near the canal. I caught her scarf. That's all I caught.
His voice thinned. She fell in.
I went after her. I couldn't reach her. The current took her under the bank roots, and by the time I got her out, he stopped. I did not need the rest. The dead around us lowered their heads as if in prayer. And you thought it ended there, I said. I wanted it to. The thing at the far end of the shelf laughed in my voice. Not loud, almost affectionately. The dead stepped closer again. One was near enough now that I could smell the dry, sweet rot in its clothing. Another had my father's old leather watch hanging loose around a wrist narrowed to bone. A child-shaped figure lifted its face and whispered with our mother's exact tenderness, "Stop making him say it." He was only a boy.
Sami flinched.
Then, to my horror, he answered it before he could stop himself. "I know." Every amber line in the chamber blazed brighter. The dead inhaled together.
Sami's face went white.
The child-shaped thing smiled. I understood at once. Not just speaking, answering, giving response, acknowledgement, consent. The place fed on exchange. A voice offered, a truth answered, a name confirmed. Every time we replied, some part of us moved further into its keeping. The pit began turning faster. Stone groaned. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. Deep beneath us, the hidden thing shifted again with slow, delighted weight. The scarf on the pedestal lifted at one edge as if breathed upon from below.
We're out of time.
Sami nodded once. Hard. Decision replacing regret. Then he did something that made me hate him for a second before I understood. He shoved me onto the bridge. The motion was so sudden I staggered 3 steps across open air before catching myself. The drop on either side yawned black and immense. The bridge was narrower than it looked, polished by age or use, with no rail, no margin, only emptiness in the turning glow below. I spun back toward him, rage exploding up my throat, and saw him kick the first of the dead off the shelf. It fell without a sound, dropping through amber-lit dark into the unseen lower depths. 3 more lunged in the same instant. Sami met them with the knife in one hand and a stone shard in the other, slashing, shoving, sacrificing balance to keep the path behind me closed. Blood soaked his pant leg. His breath came in vicious little bursts. The shelf was already too crowded. He could not hold it for long. "Go!" he shouted. The word struck the chamber like a bell. Too loud, too human. All the figures below turned toward him. The thing wearing his face opened its mouth impossibly wide and drank in the sound. I nearly spoke his name, caught myself, and ran. The bridge trembled under my boots. Halfway across, the scarf lifted fully from the pedestal and drifted upward in the heated air above the pit. Not floating randomly, rising toward me with slow, intimate purpose. I reached it before I meant to, snatching it out of the air. The moment my fingers closed around the fabric, the world changed. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. The chamber vanished. I was standing in our mother's old kitchen under the yellow light of a single bulb. The apartment smelled of cardamom tea and bleach, and the summer dust that always crept in through bad window seals. The fan clicked overhead. From the next room came the television murmuring the evening news. I knew this night instantly. I was 21. Sami had already moved out. Mother had grown quiet by then, all the light in her turned inward and guarded. This was the last ordinary week before the headaches worsened. She stood at the sink with her back to me, washing rice in a metal bowl. For one blissful, impossible second, I forgot where I was and said, "Mother."
She stopped.
Very slowly she turned. Her face was not decayed, not monstrous, not illusion distorted. It was simply her face, exactly as it had been, tired, beautiful in a worn way, a little thinner than before, eyes shadowed by sleeplessness, and full of grief so deep it looked ancient. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. I was crying before I realized it.
"Is it you?"
She looked at the scarf in my hands. "Enough of me to hurt you." The kitchen windows darkened, not with night, with sand pressed against the glass from outside, sliding upward in steady sheets until no city remained beyond them. "I tried to close it," she said quietly. "When you answered at the well, I thought I still had time." My voice shook. "What is it?" Her expression changed, and in that change I saw the village women who had frightened us as children, the grandmothers with cracked heels and old stories, the lineage of people who survived by learning what to fear. "It is not a creature the way you mean," she said. "It is a place in the world where grief learns to listen back. Men made bargains with it when the desert was wider, and burial was hard and people wanted the dead to answer. Women fed it names to get through famine. War, plague, childbirth, raids, one child spared, one husband returned, one season of rain, one enemy gone. Every bargain left an opening. Every opening wanted another. The sink water turned black. Our line kept one of those openings," she said. "My grandmother was supposed to close it, then her daughter, then me. But closing it doesn't mean sealing a door. It means finishing the exchange." Ice moved through me. "With what?" She looked at me for a long time before answering. With the voice of someone who has truly heard. I didn't understand. Then I did. "Not any death. Not any sacrifice. A chosen surrender. Someone whose name was known and answered. Someone who gave themselves knowingly, completely, not in panic but in witness. That was why it kept calling families. That was why grief mattered. Pain alone was cheap. Recognition was the price." "You were trying to give yourself for me," I whispered. She nodded.
"And you..."
A terrible little smile touched her mouth. No one finishes cleanly when they're interrupted. The kitchen lights flickered. From somewhere far off beyond the walls of the memory, I heard Sammy scream. The illusion trembled. "You still have time," she said urgently now. "Listen to me. The thing that wears your faces is only the collar. It cannot keep what is not answered freely, but the pit can. If one of you goes down speaking truth, it will take that voice and close to the other. Only one. No. It was always going to be one. No." I stepped toward her. "We leave together." Her eyes filled with such pity that it almost unmanned me.
"My son, the desert doesn't care what love deserves."
The kitchen split down the middle with a sound like tearing fabric. Stone showed through the walls. Sand poured from the ceiling fan. My mother's face rippled, her features tugged at by invisible hands. "Choose quickly," she whispered. "It is learning how to keep both of you." Then the vision shattered. I was back on the bridge, on my knees, clutching the scarf. Ahead lay the pedestal at the edge of the turning pit. Behind me, the shelf had become a slaughter. Sami was on one knee, knife lost, using a broken piece of carved stone as a club. 3 of the dead hung from him. One bit into his shoulder with teeth that were not its own. Another clawed at his injured leg. The smiling thing in his face had come close now, standing just beyond arm's reach, watching with bright, hungry tenderness as if savoring the final exhaustion of prey. Sami saw me looking, and even through all that blood and pain and horror, he managed to shape one word with his lips. "Now." The pit below the pedestal was fully open. Not a well, a throat. Dark, vast, lined with descending rings of carved mouths that moved as I watched, each set of lips opening and closing in slow anticipation. Wind rose from it, carrying the smell of tombs, deep earth, and rain on dust from places that no longer existed. From that abyss rose voices by the thousands, all the names it had ever learned, spoken and respoken until identity itself became a kind of endless swallowing. And at the center of that impossible dark, something waited to hear which of us would answer. There are moments when a life does not feel like a line. It feels like a knot. 100 choices, silences, accidents, kindnesses, cowardices, lies told for love and lies told for fear. all pulled tight into one point so narrow there is only room for one final act to pass through it. Everything before becomes the rope. Everything after depends on whether it holds. I stood at the lip of that open throat with my mother's scarf in my hands and my brother bleeding behind me, and I understood with a terrible calm that the desert had been tightening this knot for years. Not in one night, not in one generation. For years. Since the old well in the ruined village. Since my mother bargained in secret with the listening darkness. Since Sami dragged her from the covert and broke the ritual without knowing what it would cost. Since we both chose silence afterward and mistook silence for safety. The thing in my brother's face smiled wider as the dead dragged at him. He still fought, but each movement had become a shuddering effort. One of the dead had its hand buried in his torn shoulder. Another clung to his back. He was losing. We both knew it. And the creature standing before him knew it best of all. The pit below me turned and breathed, not like lungs, more like the deep inward draw of a cavernous tide. The carved mouths lining its descending rings opened, closed, opened again, each movement setting off others below it until the whole shaft looked like a spiral of feeding whispers. Names rose from that dark and overlapping layers, some loud, some buried, some spoken in languages dead long before any map had named this desert. Beneath all of them, steady and patient, came one human voice. My mother's.
Not by fear, you...
The scarf trembled in my grip. I turned. Sami had fallen to both knees. One of the dead had its teeth at his neck, not biting yet, listening. The others pinned his arms. The creature wearing his face leaned close enough that their brows almost touched, as if studying a mirror. Then it lifted one hand, my brother's hand, except longer at the fingers. Wrong at the joint, sand laid it gently against his cheek. A gesture of comfort. A gesture that made something murderous and lucid burn through every layer of my fear. I stepped onto the pedestal. The stone was warm. Not from the chamber. From beneath. As though some immense buried pulse moved through it. The moment my full weight settled there, the amber channels across the chamber floor flared blindingly bright. The dead froze. The creature lifted its head toward me with immediate, delighted attention. The pit's turning slowed not because it weakened, but because it had what it wanted now and was savoring the approach of payment. I looked at Sami. He was trying to shake his head, trying to tell me no. Always no when pain had a chance to stop with him. Always my older brother, still trying to stand in front of me even while he drowned. For the first time in years, I let myself feel all of it at once. The childhood fury of being protected through lies. The adult shame of needing him when I claimed I didn't. The grief we inherited from our mother and sharpened against one another because grief needs somewhere to go. The years we spent speaking around the truth as though truth itself were the curse. The stupid, ordinary love under all of it that neither of us had ever learned to say plainly. I knew then what the place had misunderstood about us. It knew bargains. It knew debt. It knew inheritance, grief, blood, names, the mechanics of sacrifice. But it did not know love unless love was spoken. And that, I think, was why it kept listening. I raised the scarf to my face. It smelled only of dust now. Not her perfume. Not just dust and time. Yet when I closed my eyes, I remembered her hands smoothing my hair when fever kept me awake. Remembered the way she never entered a room quietly if she thought one of us might be frightened. Remembered her exhaustion near the end and understood it at last for what it had been. Not withdrawal, but vigilance. When I opened my eyes, the creature had left Sami. It stood at the edge of the bridge facing me. Up close, under the living amber light, its false skin could no longer hold its lie properly. My brother's features shifted over a moving depth beneath, stretching, sinking, reforming. His eyes became mine, then my mother's, then an old man's, then blank wells of packed sand. Its smile remained. "Choose," it said in my own voice. The dead below and around the shelves bowed their heads. The chamber listened. I wrapped the scarf once around my wrist so I would not drop it. Then I spoke not to the pit first, not to the thing, but to Sami. "You are 18, I said. The creature's smile flickered. Sami stared at me through blood and dust, breathing hard. "You were a boy," I continued, each word ringing farther than it should have. "You thought you could save her the way people save each other in ordinary tragedies. You were wrong, but you were not cruel. You were afraid." My throat tightened, but I kept going. and I have punished you for that in my heart for years because it was easier than mourning her honestly." The pit made a sound like stone teeth grinding. Around the chamber, some of the dead twitched. The creature's face changed again, my brother's mouth thinning with irritation. I stepped closer to the edge. "I was a child when I answered at the well," I said. "I did not understand what hurt me. My mother spent herself trying to close what opened in me. Sami spent the rest of his life carrying blame that was never fully his. And I let him. I let silence do the desert's work for it." The amber lines on the floor began to pulse. The dead lifted their heads a fraction, not in hunger now, but in strain. The place was listening harder. That was the price. Not words alone. Truth spoken where it could wound. Truth that named love and blame together without lying in favor of either. The creature took one step onto the pedestal with me. The stone under its foot blackened instantly. "Enough," it said, and now the voice was no one's, only a layered human murmur shaped into command. I saw then that it was afraid, not of death, of closure, of being finished. I laughed once hoarsely because the sound of its fear gave me more strength than courage ever could.
"No,"
"You listened to us for years. Now you hear all of it." Its face split, not metaphorically. The skin parted from forehead to chin along lines too precise to be wounds, peeling back in strips like sun-dried cloth. Beneath it there was no skull, no meat, no anatomy that belonged under human skin. Only mouths. Mouth inside mouth inside mouth, nested in glistening dark layers, all speaking at once in stolen voices. A vertical avalanche of human sound spilling out of the place where a face should have been. I heard my childhood laughter. My father reciting verses. My mother pleading in the culvert. Sami sobbing where no one could hear him. My own voice at 9 years old saying hello into the dark. The sound hit like a physical blow. Below us the pit opened wider. The dead began climbing the bridge. Not toward Sami now. Toward me. Toward the one standing in witness. I understood what had to happen with an awful clarity that left no room for hesitation. It was not enough to fall in. Not enough to die. The place required a voice given knowingly and a name released from possession. That was what my mother had failed to finish when Sami dragged her away. That was what all the old bargains had twisted around without satisfying. Grief fed it. Love, spoken fully, could close it, but only if someone entered the listening place and denied it the right to keep calling the rest. Someone had to go down naming the truth and refusing return. Only one. Sami saw it in my face. He tried to rise. The dead holding him had slackened without seeming to realize it, as if the chamber itself had shifted its attention too completely to me. He ripped one arm free and lunged toward the bridge. I shouted his name. The moment I did, the pit answered. A pull like the sudden reversal of gravity seized the air. The scarf snapped in the wind. Dust, loose stone, severed fingers, dry fragments of bone, everything on the pedestal skidded toward the open throat. I dropped to one knee, fighting for balance. Sami was thrown forward across the bridge, one hand catching the edge. The creature exulted. Its mouths all opened wider and it surged for him, understanding instantly what a double harvest this could become if both brothers fell answering one another. I moved before fear could speak. I wrapped the scarf around the creature's neck, not because I thought fabric could kill it, because it was hers. Because some human part of me needed the last thing my mother had touched to be the thing that dragged this horror where it belonged. I twisted and threw all my weight backward over the pit. For one impossible second we hung there together, the creature and I, its many mouths shrieking in layered, stolen voices while the scarf cut tight between us. Its hands tore at my arms. Its false faces flared and collapsed mine, Sami's, my mother's, strangers, children, old men, lovers, soldiers, the lost and the buried and the half-remembered. All of them screaming. All of them trying to become the one voice I would obey. But I had already chosen the only voice left that mattered.
My own.
I looked up once and saw Sami dragging himself along the bridge toward me, horror breaking him open more completely than any wound. I spoke as loudly as I could into the spiraling dark. My name is Yusuf al-Hadithi. The chamber shook. I was heard here as a child. Below me, mouths opened in eager rings. My mother, Layla bint Maryam, tried to answer for me. The amber lines began going out, one by one, nearest the walls first. My brother Sami al-Hadithi is not yours. The creature convulsed in my grip. The dead on the bridge stopped climbing. He carried what he could not save. He owes you nothing. A sound rose from the pit, then unlike anything before, not hunger, not pleasure, not anger. Resistance. The deep grinding refusal of something ancient denied a debt it had counted on collecting. I tightened the scarf until my wrists screamed. "And I do not give you my name to keep calling us," I shouted. "I give it once. Here." The creatures' mouths all turned toward me. For one terrible instant, every stolen voice became my mother's.
My son.
I jumped. The fall felt endless. Wind roared up from the throat of the earth, hot, then freezing, then full of rain, then full of dust from summer centuries dead. Ring after ring of carved mouths whipped past me, each one opening as I fell, snapping at my clothes, trying to taste the rest of my words before they were lost. The creature tumbled with me, wrapped in the scarf, its limbs striking stone, its mouths shrieking names that broke apart as they echoed. I kept speaking, not prayers, not bargains. Truth. I spoke of my mother standing alone in the kitchen at dawn, salt in her hands. I spoke of Sami teaching me to shave with a cracked mirror and pretending not to see me cry after father's funeral. I spoke of my own resentment, my own cowardice, the years I spent wanting someone to blame more than I wanted to understand. I spoke each truth into the descending dark as though laying stones across a river. The mouths around me began to close. Not all at once, one by one. The deeper I fell, the more of them sealed shut. The creature fought harder as the closure spread. Its stolen faces tore loose and spun upward like burned paper. Beneath them at last I glimpsed what the caller truly was. Not a body, not a demon, but a knot of packed human voices shaped by centuries of answering. A colony of echoes pretending to be a will. A parasite of grief and repetition. Nothing original at all. That knowledge gave me the final piece of strength. I dragged it under me and forced it downward first. Somewhere below, something vast shifted to receive us. I saw no bottom. Only a final ring of mouths larger than the rest, ancient and cracked, opening with the solemnity of a gate. Into that opening I hurled the creature and the scarf together and shouted the last words I had left. "Hear me once." The great mouth closed. The impact of its closure was not sound but force. It hit upward through the shaft, through my bones, through the history of every answer ever given there. The entire throat seized. Rings of stone slammed shut above and below in a chain reaction of deafening finality. Darkness became pressure. Pressure became silence. Then there was nothing. No fall. No pain. No desert. Only a vast black stillness in which, very far away, someone was weeping my name. Sami woke on the surface at dawn with sand in his mouth and the truck half buried beside him. Later, when he tried to tell people what had happened, he found he could not describe the chamber properly. Certain details dissolved the moment he reached for them. Passages lost their shape.
Symbols blurred.
Even the route that had led them there seemed to change under sunlight. Dunes shifted overnight as if the desert had grown embarrassed by what it had exposed. But some things remained. The cuts on his body healed into white scars. The injury in his leg left him with a limp in cold weather. And when he dug frantically at the dune field where the buried structure had opened, he found only black stones scattered under the sand like broken teeth. No entrance, no chamber, no pit. Only one thing lay half uncovered near the base of a thorn bush 50 yards from the truck. Our mother's scarf, folded neatly, clean. He kept it after that, though he never wore it and never let it out of his sight. He stopped taking private desert jobs, stopped chasing rumors of buried sites and unregistered ruins. He sold the truck. He moved north. He married late. He had a daughter and never let grief go unnamed in that house. When she cried, he asked why. When she was angry, he did not punish silence into her. When old family stories rose, he told them in full, even the shameful parts, because he had learned what grows in the spaces where truth is withheld. He visited our mother's grave every year. He visited mine too, though there was no body under the stone. Sometimes he spoke aloud there. Sometimes he only sat. And in all the years after, the desert never called his name again. But this is not the part that keeps me with you. The part that remains, the part that returns in the hour before dawn, when the house is quiet and the windows hold only black glacis. What Sami told no one for nearly 20 years. On the night his daughter turned 9, he woke to find sand scattered across the hallway floor. Not much. Only a thin, winding trail, as if spilled from a small hand. He followed it to her bedroom and stood at the door listening. The room was dark. Moonlight lay across the blanket. She was asleep on her side, one fist under her cheek. And in the corner, where the shadow between wardrobe and wall should have been still, something moved very softly and said, in a voice he had not heard since the desert took me, Sami. Not his name, mine. His daughter stirred in her sleep. Then, without waking, she whispered into the darkness with the calm politeness of a child answering a familiar adult. Yes, that was when he understood the worst truth of all. Some doors in the world do not stay closed. They only wait for a voice that sounds enough like home. And far beneath the oldest dunes, where even memory dries out and hardens into stone, something that once heard my name listened to hers and smiled in the dark.